you go and tell us what you've been doing with it.
Thank you very much, Philip. I just want to say, Philip has been, we do these European-wide surveys. We're up the road, actually, and I always think it's quite interesting to do some visits here in Dublin and making sure that people here know what we're doing, because we're usually quite unknown. Eurofound, or the European Foundation for the Improvement of Living and Working Conditions, is one of the EU agencies. And we were set up in 1975 to assist the policymakers, that is the Commission, the European Parliament, but also the governments and the social partners with some research related to policy-relevant research, which they can use them in their decision-making process. So what we are doing about working conditions is this European-wide surveys, which help you to understand a little bit what's the picture on working conditions in Europe and what are some analysis related to it, which would help to understand certain phenomena and particular groups in it. We also do other research like case studies, etc. The way we're set up with we get a budget from the European Commission, but we kind of usually, our program of work is decided by what we call our governing board, which has a tripartite delegation from each member state. So somebody from the government, somebody from the employers, and somebody from the trade unions, as well as the European Commission. And they kind of set up what kind of priorities we do in our work. And I have been working there for 12 years now. You will see my colleague, I think next week, Agnès Palantillon, and we've both been working on the European Working Conditions Survey together from it. Agnès is the project leader of that survey, and but I've been working with her all the time along. So just a little bit about the different surveys and monitoring activities we have in Eurofound. On the one hand, we have the working condition survey, and I think the story I'm going to tell is mainly based on results we have from the working condition survey, and then also some contextual factors which are quite important. We've been doing that 5 times, and we're now on the field with the 6th round, and I'll tell you more about it. We also have the European Quality of Life survey, for which we're going to go on the field next year again, actually, it's the 4th wave, but there have been Eurobarometers in between as well. And that's kind of giving a picture of quality of life element. It's much more looking at citizens. We are only looking at workers. That's looking at citizens and their situation. It's looking at poverty. It's looking at trust in society. It has some elements as well, of course, related to work and the interaction between work and private life, but it's trying to give much more of a quality of life kind of approach. And then we also have the European Company Survey, and we've done that 3 times, but it's trying to map company practices and how these are negotiated at company level, at establishment level, the local level. So the first one dealt with working time and work-life balance. The second one, which was about different flexibility practices and social dialogue, but not only do they have social dialogue, but also what information is given to the actors, do they get financial support, kind of more of the qualitative elements to qualify social dialogue. And the third one, which was about employee participation and social dialogue, is how employees are directly involved into company practices, as well as how are these going together with indirect participation, or RE, social dialogue. And these are our 3 surveys. We kind of do them every couple of years. We're now kind of reflecting what we in our next kind of multi-annual program are going to do, and whether we're going to do the same surveys or slightly different. It's quite likely that we will continue with those established surveys like the European Working Conditions Survey. But next to that, we also have a network of national correspondents, because survey results are one thing, but you want to interpret a little bit what's happening at the ground level, which helps you to understand differences between countries, etc. And we used to have 2 kind of observatories, the European Industrial Relations Observatory, which looked at industrial relations, but also legislation, what happened at national level, and then the European Working Conditions Survey, where we looked more at research and other factors which could explain differences in countries. And now they're put together in your work, which is our Working Life Observatory, as kind of one observatory, and we kind of have slightly different ways of reporting. We also have a European restructuring monitor where we kind of look at what's happening at restructuring level in the different member states. And next to that, we also do some other research like qualitative case studies, kind of trying to, everything which kind of helps to understand. I heard you're doing policy evaluations. We're also going deeper into some of the policy evaluation sometimes, but then only from a comparative perspective. So you usually would then take a theme which is at the European agenda and trying to reflect a little bit how different member states do it. Like for instance on the youth guarantee, which is now a main topic, some of my colleagues are working on that issue as well, trying to understand a little bit better what initiatives are taken and trying to get, maybe it's still early, to see how they function. But I'm quite looking forward to reading, and I think it's quite interesting to see what research you produce here, because it really helps us to understand a little bit what the situation is in Ireland, and then in Ireland in comparison with other countries. So what I wanted to talk about today is men and women at work in Europe and some elements which help you to understand the picture. And I'm going to say mainly about analysis, but also some contextual factors which are sometimes different and helps you understand why countries do different things and why they might have different results. First of all, throughout the different waves of the working conditions survey, we see that there is an evolution of working conditions. Overall, very few things change, but some things are changing very slowly. And what we see, that men and women on the labor market, more women are available for work. And we see the availability is different from country to country, and it depends on your country system as well. What infrastructure do you have for care, for after-school care, how are the schooling hours, etc. But we find the diversified work patterns, and I have a slide of that which shows in different countries what kind of, how households, what's the work intensity in households, whether you have a male breadwinner one, which is still in one country the determining model, which is in Malta. There you have a male breadwinner model. In other countries you usually have a combination of different models. You have the dual earners, where you have two full-time incomes, and then you have the modified, mostly male breadwinner, where you have one full-time and one part-time income. Then countries matter, particularly institutions, social infrastructure, and preferences. I already hinted at this. So what you have is interesting to reflect upon, and we did some work in the 90s. I wasn't in Eurofund, but I read it, which was quite interesting to look at how society is organized. And this is about opening hours of schools, but also of shops, etc. And it helps you to understand, first of all, the working conditions of the hours of those people working in these facilities, but also how other people can organize their private life. If your bank is never open after 4 o'clock, if you want to go to the bank, you must find some time, and then it depends on whether you kind of have the ability to kind of organize your working hours in such a way that you might find a way to find time and not have to take time off. Then social protection systems are very important. What kind of child benefits you get, what kind of unemployment benefits, probably to move from one job to the other, and active labor market policies. They're quite important as well. Labor law, for instance, how is part-time organized? It's part-time only for, in some countries this is a very well-established practice. In the Netherlands, quite a lot of workers, I think 20% of the workers work part-time. A high number of women work part-time in the Netherlands, but you can do longer part-times. It's not only half-time. You can do, for instance, longer part-times, working 4 days a week or 3.5 days a week or something. And it's how is this organized in your system? Can you make promotion as well? Or is part-time only the small jobs where you cannot make career? Also parental leave and other leave arrangements, etc., which might help you to combine your work and your private life, and maybe changes throughout your working time. And for parental leave, there are a number of things quite interesting. It's whether you have the right, and this is both for men and women, how long this is this, and there are differences in countries. In some countries you can take up to 3 years parental leave, and how it's paid. And in some countries this is even, particularly in the Nordic countries, in some of the Nordic countries, you have a long period where you have like 80% of your income. In other countries you might have parental leave duration might vary, but it might be unpaid, like it is in Ireland, I think, in most of the jobs. So you have differences between countries, and this really influences what decision you take. In some countries, they also, on parental leave, try to encourage fathers to take parental leave by making a reserved period only for fathers, like a month, which is called the daddy month in Finland, and trying to encourage fathers also to engage into taking some parental leave. But we find that in the overwhelming majority, even in those countries where it seems to be more equal, still it's the majority of mothers who take parental leave, in the case they take parental leave. And quite often one of the reasons they give to explain is, well, first of all, it is how it's financed, but also it's kind of what part of the household income you take. So a lot of decisions are taken at the household level, but the system is important. And then social infrastructure, care facilities, whether they're public, private, what's the quality of them and how are they paid? Do you have to, are they subsidized by the state, or do you have to pay for it? School systems and also after school care. I know here in Ireland it's quite expensive to, in quite a lot of cases, to put your children in after school care. In Belgium you pay a token. Your school is until 4 o'clock. I'm from Belgium. Your school is till 4 o'clock, and then after school care is easily till 6 o'clock, and you pay €1 or €5 a week or something in order to participate for the heating. But this is relatively affordable for people to do it. So this influences how people enter and stay in the labor market, particularly in times where you have a need to that. But what we find in a lot of countries, and there your policy evaluation is quite interesting, there are changes in times of recession and in different ways. At the beginning of the crisis, and I'm again going to make the example of Belgium because I know it quite well, is they try to encourage people to take up their time which they had banked, kind of their working time accounts. There was less work, and they tried to encourage workers, rather than reducing officially their working hours, to kind of consume up their time and work in 4 days a week rather than 5. Now they've completely changed. They kind of, employers have been a bit cautious about it, and they kind of find it's an expensive system. They have to pay workers full time, and they kind of use up their hours banked. So they've now kind of reversed it, and they're actually trying to control the use up of working time accounts. Not so much, I think parental leave in these regimes are are still encouraged. You people are still have the right to take up, to work 4 days a week and take 1 day of parental leave. But all these other leaves, sabbaticals, etc., are discouraged very much. And these used to be used by some people in the course of their life in order to make a career switch or make a journey around the world. And these have been stopped now, or at least they're trying to change them. Then you have gender roles within the family, and men and women work differently. And what we find is that in general, women tend to take jobs which they can combine with their private life, in which they know what time they're going to go home, or where they have flexi time, while men tend to work and then try to combine afterwards, and it might be much more difficult to judge. And this explains a little bit our strange phenomenon that actually men are having more problems with work-life balance. Flexibility, we talk a lot about flexibility, and when we talk about it in a European circle, people tend to understand it differently. Flexibility is not good or bad. It depends who asks for it and how it's used. You can have flexibility at the request of the employer because he wants to open his shop a bit longer, or he needs to have this order finished, and he can ask you at a very short notice to stay on, and you might or might not be able and willing to do so. Overtime, for instance, can also be done, but it can also be at the request of the employee, being able to take some time off at very short notice to do something private. This really worked very well for the work-life balance analysis. So it's both flexibility and predictability which might help in terms of work-life balance. So both being able to determine a little bit when you work, some flexi time, that you can do something before you go to work or after work, taking some time off during the working day, but also predictability, knowing that you're going to go home at that time. What we also found, the OECD did some report I think already in 2003, it's already quite old, but it was quite interesting. We should redo the analysis actually, that men with the number of children tend to increase their working hours up to the fourth child, and women tended to decrease their working hours. These are generalizations, of course, and there are differences between countries. Then the other thing which is important when we reflect about work-life balance is that needs and choices change over the life course of men and women. So you might have more need for private time when you have small children, or maybe when the children are a little bit bigger, and it depends, maybe the need is even bigger when they are in primary school than they were in kindergarten, because kindergarten tends to have longer hours. But I think these needs can change over the life course. Also at the end of the career, and there we find some interesting differences between countries where it might be taking care of the grandchildren or being available to take care of the grandchildren, but also of dependent parents. The people tend to get older, and people towards the age of 60, 65 might have needy parents who need a little bit of extra help, and then a lot of women tend to reduce their working hours at the end of the career in order to being able to do that. So then working time, the company can do also a lot on working time arrangements. So working hours can facilitate the organization of private life. This has to do not only with the number of hours, I think lower hours usually help a little bit, but it's all, and not long hours. I think long hours are really make it much more difficult, but it's also this flexi time, being able to vary in the beginning, at the end of the day, this emergency leave, being able to take some time off at very short notice, and part-time work. And I already mentioned that working time flexibility is not per se good or bad, but the choices matter as well, and the fact whether you can say something and how quickly in advance you know it and you can organize your private life. And companies can make a difference, and not all working time arrangements are costly, but also not all companies can offer everything. If you need somebody to be there at reception and you only have one person because you're a small company, it's very difficult to let that person go for an hour unless you have some system to take over that job, or in a line in a factory it might also not be possible. So not all companies can offer everything, but a lot of companies can find some way of taking some work-life balance measures. So then going to the working conditions survey, so we have 5 waves already. The last one was in 2010, and the data are available through the Essex Data Archive, including a trend data set. So if you want to use it, feel free to use them. At the moment we're doing fieldwork of the 6th European Working Conditions Survey. We started in February. It's halfway, more or less. And we have one questionnaire which we translate in all the languages, and this is a really major undertaking because one bad translation has an impact on the quality of the results there. We do the European Union and the neighbor countries. In 2005 we had, as Philip already mentioned, 34 countries, so it was the then EU 27, Norway, and then some candidate and exceeding countries. In the 6th European Working Conditions Survey, we will have 35 countries. At the moment we're doing only the EU 28 plus Norway and Switzerland because of some funding problems with the European Union. The candidate and exceeding countries, they're paid from a fund called IPA, and the money hasn't been transferred, and we cannot start the work until we have that money, but it's very likely that they're going to start soon. We have around 43,000 interviews in total. This is between 1,000 and 4,000 per country, and there are some variations. Some countries have paid a little bit extra to be part of the have a slightly higher sample size. It's still very small, and a lot of countries have a much bigger national survey. However, for European numbers, it's quite good, and it gives you a good flavor. And one of the things we are a bit, which reassures us a little bit, if we compare our results for one country with what they get from their much bigger national survey, they seem to go in the same line. So we kind of try to have a representative sample, and we weight it with the labor force survey. So we kind of are hoping that we have a representative sample at European level in any case, also at national level, to go very deep at national level into sectors that the survey is not good for that. So it's a worker survey, it's both employees and self-employed, and it's face-to-face interviews in people's home, around 40 minutes. One of the difficulties at the moment, and we've changed in the last survey some elements on that, is to capture employment status. A lot of contracts are in between an employee and a self-employed, so we have a much more, and people don't know exactly where to qualify themselves, so we try to capture that a little bit better in this survey with a number of questions to do that. And we have quite a wide range of aspects of conditions of work and employment. So it deals with demographics, job characteristics, household information, including work at home in the private sphere, which we call unpaid work, working time, duration and organization, physical and psychosocial work factors, and I think psychosocial risks is something which is very high on the agenda, place of work, work organization, training, work-life balance, voice, say, health, job satisfaction, earnings. And in this wave we also have a number of questions on engagement and organizational justice, which is new for this wave. And the revision of the questionnaire, we first get the main priority. We try to keep as many trend questions as we can, but we kind of relook at it every single time because there are things changing in the world of work and the policy priorities change. Like psychosocial risks was one of the elements which our governing board kind of put a lot of emphasis on, that we would expand more questions on that issue, which we did in 2010 and now again. There are also some elements which are changing. People now, thanks to technology, work in different places, and we try to capture that to some extent. Also in work-life balance we have more questions. And the way we do this is that we have also a question, not only a discussion with our governing board, but the questionnaire development group, which consists of survey experts of the different member states. And in that context, I've had the pleasure already to work with Philip already 3 times, I think, to kind of go through this questionnaire to see, are these questions relevant? How can we capture this better? We only change where we kind of think, but to try and come with some kind of bottom-up approach as well. And it's really important that the questionnaire works in all the countries, that you don't have something which does not work, which doesn't exist in a country at all, which is so specific that you wouldn't have that. So we try to come up with some questionnaire to work in all the countries and for all jobs, etc. So it remains quite general, and some of the risks which might be very job or sector specific are not covered. So gender mainstreaming has been very central in the reflection for revision, and we have quite a lot of quality control measures. We contract out a survey, so we don't go on the field in all the countries ourselves. We have a contractor to do that. But then going to some of the results. So what we find is there is an increasing proportion of women on the labor market, but there is still an employment gender gap, and it's accompanied by more part-time work. And if we look at all the part-timers, 80% of the part-timers are women. And women do part-time work throughout their working career. When men do part-time, it's often at the beginning and at the end of the career. And then men and women work differently. There is occupational and sectoral segregation, and only 23% of the work in gender-mixed occupations. And there are gender, time, and pay gaps as well.
What do you mean by gender-mixed occupation?
So, an occupation where you find both men and women doing the same occupation.
You have a few male nurses and stuff. I assume you mean
yes.
cutoff.
Yes.
It's not 50-50, I assume.
It's not
like male-dominated, female-dominated.
Yeah, I have a slide on some of these, on some of those.
I'm curious what the cutoff is. So.
Yeah. So here you find the proportion of women in the largest occupations. So on that side you have female-dominated occupations, where I think 80% I think is the cutoff for female-dominated. Then you have some mixed one, and then you have male-dominated on this one. And here you see the percentage of women in these occupations. Dark green is white-collar employees. Lighter green is white-collar self-employed. Blue is blue-collar employed, and light blue is self-employed blue-collar. Now, all these slides you can spread them because it might be difficult to read them. Some of the mixed occupations are, in this case, food, wood, and garment workers. I wouldn't have kind of looked at that one. Numerical clerks. legal, social, and cultural professions, business and administration, associate professions, and these are the four which kind of were quite striking in them. You have some in between where it's a less card. But like, for instance, if you look at the building workers, the proportion of women is extremely low, while on the other opposite, if you look at personal care workers, where you find that 84% are female workers. So there is some differences in there. Going to another way of looking at it, and I think I have to go a little bit quicker because I'm talking too long. The level of job segregation of the workplace is a question in the survey. Are workers with the same job title men or women? And if you look at women, you find that 62% of them say that their colleagues are mostly women. If we look at men, nearly 70% say that their colleagues are mostly men. Then you have a small percentage in each of the case where you have less than 10% where their colleagues are of the opposite sex, and then you have between 21 and 28% of the workers where they say, both men and women, where they say it's more or less an equal number of men and women. So looking at working time duration, overall we see that from 1991 till 2010, that working hours have been decreasing. We're going to see now what's happening in there. We have a little bit of a comparison problem, because in 1991 we only had 12 countries. In 1995 we had 15. But if you would kind of compare the same group, the effect would even be stronger, because the new member states tend to have slightly longer working hours. On average, men work 7 hours more than women in paid employment, but if you combine paid and unpaid employment, with unpaid employment we say this work done in the domestic sphere, in the private sphere, women work more, and I will have a slide about that later on. And then there is a time segregation. Women tend to work more shorter hours, and men tend to work more longer hours. So if you look at the 48 hours or more, we see that 21% of the men and 10% of the women work these long hours. If we look at part-time work, and this is both short part-time, 20 hours or less, or between 21 and 34 hours, we see that women, it's around 40% who those work less than 34 hours and less, compared to 12% of the men who work these shorter hours. Here we compare overtime, and this is EU 27, EC 12, 15. You see, and I have here this nice thing, you see that long hours are decreasing, and the effect is even, well, this is going from, this is going in kind of in the time chronology. You see that long hours are decreasing, but we know that there's still a good proportion of workers working these long hours, and those long hours, they tend to have negative, if we do the analysis, we see that they kind of usually have more health problems with work-life balance, etc. So long hours are not good for you. We also see that there is an increase in part-time, also in short part-time. And I think this one is a quite interesting one, where we see that between 2005 and 2010, we tend to get more of the short part-time. And not all of this part-time is voluntary, because I think quite a lot of workers it's because they couldn't find another job. Some of them, yeah.
But you don't know that in the data?
No, we would know something on their preferences, whether they would like to increase their working hours, and that one you could look at. So you would have some indication whether it's voluntary or not voluntary. But then, what is voluntary? If there is no childcare arrangement, you might voluntarily choose for these hours, but if you don't have any care infrastructure, it's you don't have a proper choice either. So involuntary, I think, is clearer. So then another thing is that average working hours are different from country to country. You have a number of countries here where you see that they all work around the 40-hour kind of things. You have a number of countries where the average is slightly higher, between 40 and 50, and then you have a number of countries where you have a spread which is much more mixed, and particularly here the Netherlands, where you have this big group of part-time workers, but also Ireland has a kind of a much bigger spread over the country. So this is long and short hours among those largest occupations, where you see some differences between men and women and whether they work long hours or short hours over the country. But I think I'm going to refer you to the report to read a little bit more about it. Then the distribution of working hours within the household, where you can see the blue one here on the bottom is where you have wait, what's what? I'm trying to understand my graph here. I'm a bit lost at the moment. Yeah, it's where both partners work full-time. That's on the bottom. Then we go up, and the red is where both partners work part-time, which is a lot smaller in all the countries, except Turkey, Kosovo, which is a bit strange result. Not Turkey, Kosovo. The red one is United Kingdom and Ireland are the countries where you find a lot of couples where you have both part-time workers. Then the Bale breadwinner model, and as I already said, that's a lot. Malta is in that country, but also Turkey and Kosovo, you find it quite heavily present. Then you have modified male breadwinner, so a one part-time, female part-time in the household, and there you find the Netherlands. And then you have the smaller groups on top where you have female breadwinner and modified female breadwinner model, which is relatively small in most countries. So the number of hours spent on paid and unpaid work per week. So women working, what we see that if we look at full-time workers, we find that men slightly work more hours in the paid job than women, but if we then add the commuting time, which is more or less similar in both groups, but also the unpaid work, we find that women work more. If you look at part-time work, we find female workers working part-time, combining with the unpaid work, they work around the same hours of work as full-time men, but comparing part-time women with part-time men, we see that they work much more hours in unpaid work. Now, one of the explanations is that men working part-time is usually at the beginning, at the end of the career, where maybe the household kind of burden, or whatever you want to call it, is less for these workers as well. So if we look at unpaid working time over the life course, we kind of, it's a cross-sectional survey, but we made these groups of workers, single workers without kids, singles living at home. These are living independently. Then the couple formation without children, the youngest, the couples with young children, couples with children between 7 and 15, couples with children between, well, where the youngest is between 13 and 18, the empty nest syndrome, the older couples, and the older singles, we see that there are big differences. At the time of the union formation, this is here without children, we see that for women, this is the blue one, the increases the unpaid working time for women, but for men it decreases at that time. During the parental phase, employed women spend twice as much hours on these activities as men, but when entering the parental phase, women reduce their paid working hours with 4 hours, but increase the unpaid kind of working time by 25 hours. Men's unpaid work increasing by 12 hours. They probably increase slightly, but it's less visible, but they increase their working hours only by 12 hours. So there is a big difference between taking care, doing the care activities and the household activities is still in all the countries, including there might be some differences, but still in all the most, even in the most equal countries, women take the biggest share of the household and care activities. And when men take care in this care work, it's much more circumstance specific than for women. Like if they have specific working time organizations, atypical working hours, they tend to take more care in these activities. So then working hour preferences, one of the questions we have in there, where we see that if we look at all workers, most of the workers, more than half of the workers in all cases want to work the less hours. If they could choose their working hours, but taking the needs into account that they have to earn a living and that they would earn less money if they work less hours, we kind of see that half of the workers, more than half of the workers, want to work the same hours as they do currently. In the yellow bar, this is the ones where they would like to work less hours, and in the blue bar, it's where they would like to work more hours. And there we see some interesting differences, between self-employed, and we see that a lot of the self-employed would like to work less hours. And employed other is mostly those with unemployed contract. We find that we find more workers where they would like to work more hours, slightly more than those who would like to work less hours. If we look at age categories, we see that there are big differences. More of the younger workers would like to work more hours if they could, slightly less than those who would like to work less hours. But this is a big difference with the other age groups. And the same thing for men, where you have much bigger group where they would like to work less hours, which is different to women, and by the women you have more women who would like to work more hours in comparison with men. If we did some analysis, which was done by Dominique Anxot and Angelika Kummerling, we see on average there is a desire for fewer hours for men and women. Particularly marked in those countries with very long hours. There you saw it much stronger. This is Turkey, Albania, and Greece, but also in Sweden there was a very strong result. There were a few countries where there was a preference for more hours for both men and women. In Latvia and Lithuania, for men, Estonia and Malta, and for women, the Netherlands, Italy, and Ireland. We saw also in those countries, we had a question whether they had to reduce their working hours in the last year, and this was at the time of the crisis actually, and in Ireland this was one of the countries where a lot of the workers saw their working hours reduced, as well as in the Baltic states. In other countries a different measure was often taken, more workers were laid off or other measures were taken, so this could explain a little bit this finding. We see a longer hours are desired among part-timers, particularly in high part-time use countries, including the Netherlands. It's not that everybody wants to work part-time. Quite a lot of workers and female workers would like to work longer hours if they could. Life course variations are important. The presence of children and for older workers is important. Women in the parenting phase show a higher likelihood to prefer a reduction of working time, and men with children aged between 7 and 12 are less likely to opt for a reduction of working time or do not want to change it. So this is having the need to have a kind of good enough income in order to raise your children, I think is probably one of the explanations for that. And both older men and women do not wish to increase their working time. And then in the public sectors, male employees report smaller differences between usual and preferred working hours. I think in the public sector, in a lot of countries, you kind of have more say over your working hours. I don't think in Ireland this is the case, but in a lot of other countries this is the case. So then looking at the question of work-life balance, 18% of the workers say they have problems with work-life balance. This is slightly more the case for men than for women, especially men between 30 and 49 years old, and dissatisfaction is more evenly spread over the career. An important determinant is whether there are children in the household, and factors which increase the likelihood of having a good work-life balance is part-time work, flexibility in working time arrangements, working the same hours every day, having fixed starting and finishing times, and not difficult to take time off during working hours. Factors which include the likelihood of not having a good work-life balance, working long hours, night work, evening work, and weekend work.
So when you say the presence of children, you mean that people with children find it harder to have work-life balance?
Yes, yeah.
Life is harder?
Well, it's just juggling between two spheres in a way, and it's kind of then, there are other factors which could help a little bit, but yeah, I think that's when your attention is quite spread. Next time we will have more questions on work-life balance. We will have a number of questions which are much more at the conflict between work and private life. Do you keep on worrying about your work? Do you feel that you, when you're at home, do you take your worries from home to your work and do not have enough time and we go from two ways. We go from home to work and from work to home. We look at both interactions. And we have also one question, which I'm looking forward to having this result. Despite having problems sometimes, and you might have reports problems, we have one question which we ask only to people with children is, do you think you get better on with your children because you go to work? This is a question they asked in the Finnish survey. I'm not sure whether the wording is exactly the same as I'm saying it, but this is the idea we have. Because I think, well, our hypothesis, and this is also how they use it in the Finnish quality of work life survey, is that a lot of women might juggle, and women and men might juggle between the two spheres, but still they prefer to work than not to work. And I think this is something which is quite important in the European agenda to show this. I think it's an enrichment as well, and this is what we're trying to find out, whether we could get some data on that. Here we see differences between countries, and the red bar here is female and the blue bar is men, where they say they have a good fit between work and private life. And you see that there are slight differences between different countries. Then over the time, where you see not well and not at all well, is the bars you see here, where the males between 35 and 49 are those who report most problems, male in total, but particularly at that age group. Then flexibility of workers and employers has an impact. 1/3 of the workers say that they can easily take 1 hour off for private issues. It's slightly easier for men than for women, which you can see here in both of the elements, but the differences are not very big. And then more than 1/3 of the workers work in their free time in order to meet work demands. It's slightly more for men than for women, but it's 6 or 7% do this nearly every day, and nearly 20%, both men and women, do this once per week. What we show here is those working longer hours. They who say they work 48 hours or more, they also work more in their private time compared to those who work less than 48 hours per work. But I think these blurring frontiers, I think, is something which we want to continue to follow and try to understand much more. I think thanks to technology, we can work at any place and any time, and this can help us. We might be able to go home a little bit earlier, take care of the children, and then work again. It might also that we don't stop working anymore, and this can be at the request of the worker, or can be your own initiative, that can be peer pressure, and I think this is something which we are only at the moment still grasping, kind of the surface of the iceberg. We don't know yet what's the real impact, and maybe what's the impact at longer term. I think in particular phases of your life, you have especially knowledge workers. Well, this is the case for knowledge workers only, where you can do those things. It's interesting to keep on kind of reading, etc. And it's quite nice that you can do it everywhere. However, we might not be able to stop. And what we find is that in some companies, they start switching off the email. Like Renault, they have stopped, they have a kind of a policy where you can't send emails anymore between 8 o'clock in the evening and 6 o'clock in the morning, in order to prevent a little bit this competition between workers. I still send you an email at 12 o'clock, and you kind of more or less check whether the other one at 1 o'clock sends you a reply back. So they try to discourage this kind of behavior among workers. So we are going to do some work with our network of correspondents to try and see what's the situation of ICT and working time and impact as well on different things, and what policy initiatives they find both at national level but also by workers. I'm going to go very quick now because I'm realizing I'm consuming nearly all the time. So we are putting this whole discussion on working time and work-life balance into a bigger framework on reflecting on what's sustainable work. How can we see that people can participate in the labor market even if they have care responsibilities or time needs, but also whether they are willing and able to do so until a later age. And it's the combination of different elements which make work sustainable. So we try to look at job quality from different angles, and work-life balance interaction between work and private life is one element of it. I think my colleague is going to talk a lot more about the other aspects of job quality. And we know as well that this changes over your life course, and maybe certain effects of working long hours at a particular phase of your life is bad for your health, but maybe you can recuperate from it. And it's not only working long hours, but working very intensively, which usually goes hand in hand. And how long can you do this? And sometimes workers are not able to do it, so we kind of try to see a little bit what happens there. And then also, of course, these policies and infrastructure, which are very important. So what are resources available to workers to control their working life and can contribute to an increased working life? This is discussion in quite a lot of countries, how to raise effective retirement age, and to what extent can a worker really and a company really work at it. On this one, I think there are some hanging issues still. What is work and what is non-work might become much more difficult. So, like for instance, childcare can be a work, but can also be unpaid, what I call unpaid work, work done in a private activity. And in some countries, you have much more of the professionalization of this than in other countries. Then measuring duration is very difficult, and it's becoming much more difficult thanks to ICT, but also working time accounts, etc. And there is this blurring frontiers between working and non-working. Is sending one email work, and do you calculate it or not? It might be, but it kind of is an impact on your private life to some extent. Who decides upon the organization? The service industry, the service worker and the client will meet at the same time. There might be predictability and variability, and we have this global world, and your client might be on the other side of the world, and when you work might depend on that. What are the choices and capabilities of workers in order to kind of reflect on work-life balance? And then an important element is what are the roles of the different actors. And I think in Eurofound we really try to reflect on national policies, but combined with company actors and including the social partners have play a role at it, as well as some cultural norms. I think in some countries there is still the cultural norm that when you have small children you withdraw from the labor market for a period of time. In other countries they say you can reduce your working hours, but it's good to come back to work relatively quick. And this is a cultural norm. It's very difficult to say what's good and what's bad in it. So I'm sorry I took a very long time, but I thought it was interesting to give you some of the results we found through our working conditions survey. All our reports are on the website. These are two of them. This is the general overview report, and this is women, men, and working conditions in Europe. There is also the working time and work-life balance in a life course perspective, which is another of the secondary analysis. Usually our secondary analyses are contracted out to very good researchers, like you could apply as well, I think, if you would be interested in it. And the data set is available through the Essex Data Archive. Thank you.